Hello, Matthew Road. All right, we have a few questions from Sunday morning, and some of them are directly related to the service. Some of them are related to just Bible study in general. One question has to do with an individual who's reading through the Bible and has gotten to the book of Leviticus. And in the book of Leviticus, there's a reference to leprosy on the walls of the house. And the question is, what's going on with that? And here's the thing about leprosy. First century leprosy that Jesus encountered, the 10 lepers, those kinds of things, though that disease is probably the modern Hansen's disease, what we think about leprosy today, like the leprosy colony at Molokai in Hawaii, where Father Damien had a big group there. Leprosy colonies found in India, where hospitals are set up there, and now there's treatment for it. The American Leprosy Association, which they came, American Leprosy Mission, they came, their CEO came and presented here at our church. We did a whole fundraiser one summer, and you can treat leprosy for about $300 a year, or for about $300 you can treat a child with leprosy, and that group does great work. And that disease is also known as Hansen's disease, and it's a very specific disease. In the Old Testament, the word leprosy, it's a little different word, and the suspicion is that it has to do with any broad number of skin lesions or any broad number of other kinds of lesions, like in this case on the wall of a house. My guess would be something like black mold or some other type of lesion. So in the Old Testament, the word leprosy is kind of the word we've used, but it's probably a broader sense of lesion, infectious related, or mold, or some other kind of transmittable either disease, or that would cause, like black mold, which would cause lung problems, or some other thing like that. And so leprosy in the Old Testament is not the exact same kind of leprosy as the New. The New Testament leprosy, Hansen's disease, may have shown up some in the Old Testament, but there's been speculation that Hansen's disease was not even in that region during the time of Moses. And that the word leprosy is just a broad term for lesion or infection of the skin, or a lesion that develops maybe on the wall of a building or something like that. And so it's really just a general health term. And so that's probably what's going on with that, where you would have to watch it over a period of time. If it was black mold, it would continue to progress and eventually cause health problems, and they would just destroy the house. We see it in Texas, so I don't know exactly, but it's probably something like that. But by the way, this would not be surprising, given that a lot of the houses were made out of mud that was pulled out of a river nearby. So there's all kinds of things that you could have inadvertently introduced that would be infectious, causing infectious problems within the community that you induce by putting it into the wall of your house. So that's that. Secondly, does Jesus call all or only those who are heavy, weary and heavy laden? Okay, so I said on Sunday morning that Jesus only reveals the Father to whom he wills, and the Father only reveals the Son to whom he wills, that God is sovereign over salvation. But then the very next verse, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are heavy and weary laden." Weary laden and heavy laden, or weary, or that language. And what's going on there, I think, is the statement that he calls all who are willing to admit that they're weary and heavy laden. And that's why he says, "I praise you, Father, that you haven't revealed yourself to the wise and learned, the intelligent, but to infants." So people who view themselves as really intelligent, self-reliant, they are not called of God because they're unwilling to be called by God on those terms. So it seems to me that God's sovereign election over salvation has God, by his own sovereign choice, granting salvation to those who will humble themselves, acknowledge their dependency, acknowledge their frailty, acknowledge their complete spiritual poverty. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and that this is the means by which God elects. Now, that being said, this does not deny the fact that there's still the necessary work of the Holy Spirit in a person's life. This does not deal with the whole gamut of theology around predestination, election, around the work of the Holy Spirit in order to bring someone to salvation. It is really just purely on my part an observation to say God is sovereign over salvation, and the mark of his election on people are people who will humble themselves, acknowledge their dependence upon him, and to them he will graciously reveal himself and his Son so that they may be saved. And the whole theology of election and predestination and those kinds of things, Romans 9, 10, and 11, some of the nuances of Ephesians 1 and 2, I would say I'm not trying to answer that, but in the Matthew 11 passage, it does seem like Jesus says, I'm sovereign over salvation. You guys didn't receive John the Baptist. He was Elijah. Why didn't you receive him? Because you're too smart for your own good. You're arrogant. You're too smart for your own good. You think you know too much. You think you're so wise. If you'd had the attitude of dependence like an infant on the dependence of an infant has on a mom, on its mom, on his or her mom, that kind of dependence would have allowed you to hear John the Baptist and his message. But a lack of that humility meant you couldn't hear him as such. So hopefully that answers that question. A related question to it is, can we do any good works apart from the work of the Holy Spirit? Because we know already that you can do good works. Like we got a team that's going to Moore, Oklahoma tomorrow. There'll be about 20 people going. Half of us will go there for the wrong motives, and there'll be no eternal reward. So, it is a risk. You can do good works with the wrong motive and still not honor God. And this is always a distinction that we need to make, is that the external appearance of good works does not guarantee that these are really lasting good works, but there's a whole attitude of heart that must be done. Jesus confronted the Pharisees that had all kinds of external observations of the law and good works and said it was all lost because they had the wrong attitude the whole time. Kind of back to the Matthew 11, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden. In other words, good works done by those who are completely dependent upon the God who made them, those who are humble before him, those who are doing it with the motive to honor him and glorify the Son. Those individuals, those are real good works. The rest are not. They're false. They're faux works, not real works. So then the question is, can you do that without the work of the Holy Spirit? The answer is no. Of course, there's no good work that can be done apart from God's empowering by his Holy Spirit, because he says the fruit of the Spirit is, which implies all fruit ultimately comes by the work of the Spirit of God within our lives. And so it is necessary for the Spirit to come and do a work of, first of all, rebirth, so we would ever have the right motive for any such work, but then to empower us to good works. It's the Spirit it's called the gifts of the Spirit for a reason. The Spirit gifts individuals for laboring in Oklahoma over a hayfield or a broken down house. It is the Spirit that gives us the good works to, or the gifting to teach or preach or work with children or sing or all of those kinds of things, so that the works done are being done by the power of the Holy Spirit. But there's a synergy to that. Salvation is entirely the work of God. We are unable to save ourselves. But good works by a believer, once they've been redeemed, is now synergistic, where both the believer in faith and right attitude and heart works, and the Spirit of God comes alongside us and empowers us in that work, so that it's not that we're devoid of any responsibility in good works. It is to say that we work by the power of the Holy Spirit, so laboring together with God, do good works in his name. And so in that regard, it's a little different than salvation, where I'd say salvation is monergistic, which means only the work of God can bring salvation. Only God does that work. I don't do it with him. But good works that result in eternal rewards are synergistic, where both God both God through his Spirit and the believer coordinate together in unison to bring glory to the Father through the exaltation of the Son. And so, anyway, that's a very good question. So those are the questions for this week. We'll post it for both 7:17 and Sunday morning, since it was the same service for all three. God bless you guys. See you this week.